Hi everyone, and welcome to Insomnia Files. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. 6 drivers tonight. Different decades, different roads, different companies. 5 of them are retired now. 1 of them has a son who still drives a truck. Every one of them told me the same thing at some point in the conversation, in almost the same words. Nothing happened. Nobody got hurt. There's no proof of anything, and every one of them changed how they drove for the rest of their life. So dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's get out on the road. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. We'll start on I-77 in 1979, on the worst 3 miles of mountain in Virginia. The fog on Fancy Gap came up so fast I lost the trailer. That's not an expression. I looked in my West Coast mirror, doing 31 miles an hour down a 7% grade, and there was no trailer behind me. 48 feet of it. Gone. Just gray, packed solid up against the glass, like somebody had stuffed a mattress in there. I want you to sit in that a second. Because I've been sitting in it 46 years. You're on I-77 southbound out of Virginia, dropping off the Blue Ridge into Carolina. 3 miles of downhill with runaway ramps cut into the bank. Loaded. I was 78,000 pounds, and I could see, maybe, the front 8 feet of my own hood. I was 26 years old, and I'd been driving 4 years, and I had never once been scared in a truck. I got scared on Fancy Gap. You don't stop. That's the first thing anybody teaches you, and it's the thing that kills people who don't listen. You do not stop on the travel lane in fog on a grade, because the man behind you is coming down at 60 with his flashers on, thinking that makes him visible, and he will drive into your trailer, and neither one of you will walk away from it. Every year somebody does it there. In 13, they had 100 vehicles in one pile on that stretch, and it made the news. And I sat in my kitchen in Kentucky and watched it, and thought, well, so you keep rolling, and you find the white line, and you drive the white line. That's what I did. I put my window down and hung my head out in it, which they'll tell you not to do, and I found that white line, and I ran it at 15 miles an hour, with the fog wet on my face and my flashers going, and my whole body listening for a horn. And about a mile down, there was a man walking on it, on the white line, on the fog line at the edge of the travel lane, going the same direction I was, maybe 40 feet ahead, which was as far as I could see anything. I laid on the horn. That air horn on a Pete will hurt your ears at 10 feet. He didn't jump. He didn't turn. He kept walking at the exact pace he'd been walking. And here's the part where I did something stupid, and I've never pretended otherwise. I slowed to match him. I don't know why. I've had 4 decades to come up with a reason, and the best I've got is this. At 26, with no visibility, and no shoulder, and no idea where I was, on that mountain, a man walking on the fog line was the only piece of information I had. He knew where the line was. I wanted to know where the line was, so I ran at walking pace behind a man in the fog, on the steepest grade in Virginia, with a loaded trailer behind me that I could not see. And it is the single most dangerous thing I have done in 51 years of driving. I did that for what I'd guess was 4 minutes. And in 4 minutes, he never once looked back. Think about what that means. There's a Peterbilt 8 feet off your shoulder. You can feel the heat off the engine. The compression brake is going. And if you've never heard a Jake brake from outside the truck, it's not a sound. It's a hammering. It's like standing next to a machine gun in a bucket. Not once, not a glance. His arms didn't swing. That's the thing I never told anybody until my wife. And I didn't tell her until 1994. When a man walks, his arms go. Even a man carrying something has one arm going. Even an old man shuffling has some sway in him. This thing walked with its arms straight down and still, like they were pinned, and the legs went, and the rest of it didn't move at all. Somewhere in there, I quit thinking about the road. I want to be honest about the state I got into. My hands were locked on the wheel so hard my forearms cramped up, and I was making a noise, not words, just a sound in my throat, over and over. The kind of thing you don't know you're doing until later. And then the fog opened. That's how it goes on that mountain. You come down out of it into clear air, and it's like walking out of a building. 1 second gray. Next second I could see 2 miles of North Carolina laid out ahead of me in the sun. Empty road, no shoulder to speak of. Guardrail on the right, cut bank on the left. Nobody. Nowhere for anybody to have gone. It stopped at the bottom, in the truck lane past the ramp, and I sat there with the engine running for a long time. Then I got out and walked the whole right side of that trailer, looking for, I don't know what, a mark, something. There wasn't anything. There's never anything. That's how these go. I made my delivery in Charlotte 4 hours late, and the man on the dock chewed me for it, and I let him. Now here's what I did with it for the next 46 years, and this is the actual reason I'm talking to you. I told it as a funny story for about 20 years, at truck stops, at my brother-in-law's, at a Christmas party in 1988. I had a version of it that got laughs. Damn fool followed a hitchhiker down Fancy Gap. I'd do the horn, I'd do the arms. People ate it up, and in 1994 my wife and I were driving back from her mother's at night, and I was telling it to her sister in the back seat, doing the bit, and I got to the part about the arms, and I stopped talking. I pulled onto the shoulder of a 4-lane in Tennessee and got out of the car and stood there because I heard myself say it out loud for maybe the 200th time. And it went through me all at once that I had never, in 20 years, asked myself the only question that mattered, which is what was he walking toward? There's nothing on that grade. It's 3 miles of mountain between 2 exits, with no houses, no drives, no nothing. And a man on foot down there, in fog, at 10 o'clock in the morning, has come from somewhere and is going somewhere. And there is nowhere at either end. I stood on that shoulder in Tennessee for maybe 5 minutes, and my sister-in-law thought I was having a heart attack. I drove 22 more years after that, retired in 2016. I never told it as a funny story again, and I never once, in 22 years, ran Fancy Gap in fog. If it was socked in, I got off at 14 and took 52 down through Mount Airy, which is an hour and change and a road that'll rattle your teeth out, and I did it every single time, and I ate the hours. And when dispatch asked, I said I had a load that didn't like the grade. My son drives now, 2nd generation, out of the same yard. I gave him one piece of advice when he got his license, and it's the only one he's ever remembered. And it isn't about following distance, or scale houses, or how to talk to a DOT officer. I told him, if you can't see, don't take help from anything on foot. He laughed at me. He was 22, he's 40 now, and he called me last February from a hotel in Withville, and he'd shut down for weather. And about halfway through the conversation he got quiet and said, "Dad, "Did you ever see anything on 77? And I said, "Why?" And he said, "No reason, never mind." And we talked about his daughter's braces for 20 minutes and hung up. I've called him back about it twice. Both times he's changed the subject. So I've quit asking, and I'll tell you the truth. That's worse than anything that happened to me on that mountain in 1979. Because whatever I saw once, and I've had a whole life to sand the edges off it. He's got 30 years left in that seat. The next man never saw anything at all. That's what makes his the one I think about when I'm in the car. He ran paper products through West Virginia on US 19, 4 nights a week, back when the CB radio was the only voice you'd hear between midnight and dawn. And in the spring of 1988, somebody started talking to him on Channel 19, who knew things about his truck. You have to understand what the CB was in 1988, or none of this lands. No cell phones, no internet, no GPS. You're alone in a box for 11 hours, and the radio is the entire social world. Channel 19 all night long. Bear reports, weather, scale houses open or closed, a fella in Ohio arguing with a fella in Indiana about a football game for 200 miles, half of it's nonsense. All of its company, everybody had a handle. I was preacher, because my daddy was one, and because I didn't cuss, which in that crowd made me about as exotic as a giraffe. I ran US 19 through West Virginia 4 nights a week, hauling paper products out of Covington. 2-lane most of the way back then, before they finished 4-laning it. 60-some miles of it through the mountains, where you'd not see a house light for 20 minutes. That's where I met him, if met's the word. First time was in March, about 1 in the morning, and I'd been running quiet. Nobody on the channel, which happens on a Tuesday, and a voice came up and said, "Northbound on 19, you got your marker out on the driver's side." Now that's a normal transmission. That's the most normal thing in the world. Somebody sees a light out on your trailer, they tell you, because you'll get written up for it. Happens every night in America. I keyed up and said, "Appreciate it." "Which one?" And he said, "Third from the back." I said, "Say again, third from the back?" And he said, "Yes, sir." So I found a wide spot and got out with a flashlight, and the third marker light from the back, on the driver's side, was out. And I got back in the truck, and I got maybe 2 miles up the road before it hit me that I hadn't passed anybody, and nobody had passed me. And going on 40 minutes, I keyed up. "Hey, whoever spotted that marker, appreciate you. Where you at?" Nothing. I called for him 3 or 4 times over the next 20 minutes. That's not unusual either. People key up and go on about their business. Half of them are asleep in a sleeper somewhere with the radio on. I let it go. Second time was maybe 3 weeks later. Same road? Later. Going on 2, the voice said, "You're running heavy tonight, preacher." And I want to point at that, because it's where a normal night quit being one. He used my handle. I hadn't said it. I hadn't keyed up once that night. I sat there for probably 10 seconds with my thumb on the mic before I answered, and when I did, I tried to sound easy about it. "Who's that?" And he said, "You're pulling about 42 on that trailer. You'll want second gear on the grade at the top." I was pulling about 42,000 pounds. I'd loaded it myself that afternoon. I said, "Buddy, do I know you?" Nothing. Nothing for the rest of the night, and nothing the next night. And I told myself the whole way home that a man who knows trucks can look at a rig and guessed the weight inside a couple thousand pounds, and that I'd probably said my handle earlier and forgot, and that there were probably 3 preachers running that road. All of that's true. Every bit of it is a reasonable thing to say. He came back in June. June was the bad one. I was northbound about 12:30, and the channel had been busy earlier, and then it went quiet the way it does. And he said, "Preacher, you got somebody in your sleeper." I don't know how to describe what that does to you. My sleeper was 8 feet behind my head, with a curtain across it. I ran alone. I had run alone for 9 years. I said, "That's not funny." And he said, and I've never forgotten the flatness of it, "I'm not making a joke. I want to tell you what I actually did, because it's not what people think they do. I did not pull over. I did not go back there. I did not reach behind me. I turned the radio off, and I turned the dome light on. And I drove 11 miles to the truck stop at Summersville, doing 80 on a road posted for 55, sitting straight up in the seat, staring at the road, with my whole back feeling like it was made of paper. The thing I remember is that I would not look in the mirror on the sleeper side. There's a little mirror in the cab that shows you back in there, and I would not look at it. I had my head turned so far to the left that my neck hurt for 2 days. I pulled in under the lights at that truck stop, right up next to the building where there were people, and I got out and left the door open and stood in the parking lot for a minute. Then I got the flashlight, and I pulled the curtain back, bunk made, duffel where I left it. Cooler, boots, nobody. I sat in the restaurant until it got light. I had 4 cups of coffee, and a waitress named Dot asked me twice if I was all right. Here's what makes this one different from every other story I've heard at a counter, and it's the reason I've told it maybe 6 times in 37 years. I told a driver about it in 1991. Fella named Bo out of Beckley, who'd run that road since the 70s. And when I got to the sleeper part, Bo put his fork down and he said, "Did you go back there?" I said, "Not till Summersville." And Bo said, "Good. Just that. Good." And he picked his fork back up and ate his eggs and talked about his truck for 20 minutes and would not come back to it. And when I pushed him, and I did push him, "I'm not proud of how hard," he said. Preacher, I don't know nothing about it, and I ain't going to learn nothing about it at my age. Now, what do you do with that? Because there's a version where Bo was messing with me. And truckers will absolutely mess with you. That's 90% of the profession. And there's a version where an old man who'd run US 19 for 15 years heard a story he recognized and decided he'd rather not. I got off the road in 2004 and drove a school bus for 11 years, which is the best job I ever had. The CB's still in my basement. I couldn't tell you why I kept it. And I'll say the thing that actually stayed, which has nothing to do with being scared. He was right about the marker light. That's what I keep coming back to at 71 years old. He told me a light was out, and it was out. He told me my weight, and he had it. Whatever that was on Channel 19 in the spring of 1988, it was not lying to me. Not one time. It was helping. By any ordinary definition of the word, which means the third one was true too. And I drove 11 more miles. I asked him once whether he'd have gone back and checked his own sleeper if it had been an ordinary night. He said yes without thinking about it. Then he sat quiet for a while and said, "That's what I can't get past." The next account is the shortest I've ever put in one of these. It runs about 10 minutes. Route 119 through Logan County, West Virginia, coal truck country, and there was a woman standing at the top of an exit ramp. 2001. I was 23. I'd had my CDL 8 months, and I was running a dedicated route out of a warehouse in Ohio, down to Charleston and back, 6 nights a week, on US 35 and then down 119. Route 119 through Boone and Logan County at night is about as dark as anywhere in this country. Coal trucks in the daytime, nothing at night. And the road follows the creek, so it's turn after turn after turn. With a rock wall on one side, there's an exit ramp near Danville where I'd stop and pee. Because there was a wide spot at the top and no cameras and nobody around at 2 in the morning, I did it probably 100 times. In October, there was a woman standing at the top of that ramp, 30s maybe, jeans, a light-colored jacket, hair down, standing off the pavement in the gravel, with her arms crossed like she was cold, which she should have been. Because it was about 40 degrees, I stopped. Of course I stopped. There's a woman alone at a ramp at 2 in the morning on 119, and I was 23 years old, and my mother raised me. I got the passenger window down and hollered over. "You all right? You need a ride?" She said, "I'm waiting." I said, "Waiting for what, ma'am?" And she said, "I'm waiting." Exactly the same words, same everything. Like a machine that gives you a receipt. I want to be plain about this, because it's most of what I've got. Her face never changed. Not while I was talking to her. Not while she was talking to me. I had the dome light on and the window down, and I was maybe 12 feet from her, and her face did not move. I asked, did she want me to call somebody? We had a phone in the truck by then, a big brick thing. I told her I could call somebody, and she said, "I'm waiting," 3 times. And I said, "All right." And I said, "You be careful." And I rolled the window up, and I pulled out. I got about a half mile down the ramp, onto 119, and I started shaking, not a shiver. My hands came off the wheel. I had to pull into a pull-off by the creek and put it in neutral and sit there with my hands in my armpits until they stopped. And I couldn't have told you then, and I can't tell you now, what exactly I was scared of. Nothing happened. A woman said 3 words to me. I sat in that pull-off for 40 minutes, and then I did the thing I've never gotten over. I turned around. I drove back up to that ramp and up to the top, and my headlights came across the gravel, and there was nobody there, and I got out. 23 years old, 2:30 in the morning, Logan County, and I got out of the truck and walked around in the gravel with a flashlight, calling out. Nothing. No car. No footprints that meant anything in that gravel. Nothing down the bank. I drove to Charleston and unloaded and drove home. And did not sleep. Now here's the whole rest of it. And this is why it's short. I went back the next night, and the night after. And every night for the rest of that October, and into November, she wasn't there. Not once. Not ever again. But I slowed down at that ramp every single night I ran that route for the next 2 years, and I looked every night. I quit that job in 2003 and got on with a company running the interstate, and I have not been on 119 since. And I'm 48 years old and live in Columbus, and there is no reason on earth I'd ever be on 119 again. Here's what I want to say, and then I'm done. Everybody who hears this tells me it was a woman in trouble, domestic thing, walked out of a house, in shock, not thinking straight, waiting on somebody who was coming to get her, and that a shocked person will repeat one phrase like that, and that a shocked person's face goes flat, and that she probably got picked up 10 minutes after I left. That is a completely sensible explanation, and I've believed it for 25 years. And every time I believe it, I have to also believe that I drove away from a woman in that condition on 1/19 in October at 2 in the morning because I got a bad feeling, and they're about the same weight. The only part I've never been able to fit into either one is that when I asked if I could call somebody, she didn't say no. She said the same 3 words, and I've thought about it about 1,000 times. And there's no reading of it where a person in trouble doesn't hear the word call. He asked me to stop the recording after that one. We talked about his kids for 20 minutes before he'd let me start it again. And when we did, he wanted to go back and say one more time that she was probably just a woman in shock and that he should have made her get in the truck. The next one is the only account in this batch with 2 witnesses in the cab. She was driving. Her husband was in the sleeper, awake, looking through the same windshield at the same moment, and for 6 years afterward, he told her there was nothing there. Dale and I team drove 11 years, and the only thing we ever really fought about was Sandstone Mountain. Team driving means the truck never stops. One of you sleeps while the other one drives. 4 or 5 hours at a stretch, and you make coast to coast in a way a solo driver can't. It sounds miserable, and it was the best decade of our marriage. You'd be amazed what 22 years of somebody's company does. When you're not both trying to also run a household. We ran freight, mostly reefer, and we lived out of that truck about 300 days a year. March of 2015, we were eastbound on I-64 in West Virginia, coming up on Sandstone, which is a long grade above the new River Gorge. 2 in the morning, sleeting, and the road crews hadn't been through yet. I was driving. Dale had been down about 3 hours. Now, I'll tell you mine, and then I'll tell you his. And you can do what you want with it, because 11 years later, we've both quit trying. Mine sleet, wipers on high, and the road's got that look where you can't tell if it's wet or if it's ice. I'm doing maybe 45 in the right lane with my hazards on, nothing else on the road, and in my headlights, up ahead in the left lane, there's a car stopped, older car, dark, sitting crosswise about halfway into the lane. No lights on it at all. No flashers, no taillights, nothing. I got on the brakes easy. You don't stab them on ice with 43,000 pounds of frozen chicken behind you. And I got over as far right as I could and came past it at maybe 20. And as I came alongside, I looked. Because you look, there were people in it. 4 of them. 2 in front, 2 in back. And every one of them was facing forward, sitting up straight, looking out the windshield at nothing. Nobody turned. A semi comes past you at 20 feet in a sleet storm with the lights going, and you look up. That's not a decision you make. That's your neck doing it. 4 people, not one head moved. I got past it, and I got on the CB and called it out. Stopped vehicle in the left lane on Sandstone eastbound, occupied, no lights, because that's what you do. Somebody's going to come up on that at 70, and there won't be anything left. No body answered. Channel was dead. I woke Dale. I put my hand back through the curtain and shook his foot and said, "Baby, get up here." And here's Dale's. Dale says he was already awake. He says he'd been awake maybe 20 minutes, lying in the bunk listening to the sleet on the roof. Because it's loud back there, and you don't sleep through it, and he says he heard me brake. and he says he felt the truck move over, and he sat up in the bunk and put his head out through the curtain, and he was looking through the windshield. At the same time, I was looking out the side. And Dale says there was nothing in the left lane, ence pre-road, sleet, and me braking for nothing. We had that argument for 6 years. Not constantly. It'd go a year, 2 years. Then it'd surface at a Thanksgiving, or at 3 in the morning in Nebraska, and we'd be right back in it. And I want to say, because people always assume Dale is not a man who tells you you're crazy. He never once said I made it up. What he said every time was, I was looking, Trina. I was right there, and I was looking, and he was. That's the problem. He was. Now the part that broke it open. And I've only told this to my daughter. In 2021, Dale had a stroke. Small one, recovered mostly. But he was in the hospital in Roanoke 4 days, and I stayed with him. And one night, he was on something for the pain, and he was loose. And out of nowhere, he said, I saw the people. I said, and what people? And he said, in the car, on the mountain. I sat there, and he said he'd seen them, 4 of them, facing forward. He said he'd seen them clear as anything. In that half second, his head came through the curtain, and that when I woke him up and said what I said, he'd already decided he wasn't going to be a man who agreed. I asked him why. And he said, because you'd have wanted to go back. We would have, that's the truth. And I knew it as soon as he said it. If Dale had backed me up at 2 in the morning on that mountain, I'd have found a place to turn around, and we'd have gone back up Sandstone in a sleet storm, in a loaded reefer, to check on a car that 4 people were sitting in, with no lights on. He knew that. He made a decision in about 1 second in a sleeper berth. And then he held it for 6 years. He doesn't remember telling me. I've never brought it up since. He had another stroke in 2023, and he's not driving anymore, and neither am I. Here's where I've landed, and it isn't anywhere good. For 11 years, I thought the scary part of that night was the car. It isn't. I don't know what was in that lane, and I've stopped needing to. Some nights I think it was 4 people in a broke-down Buick who were scared out of their minds and stared straight ahead because that's what shock does, and that we drove off and left them. And that's a bad enough story on its own. The part that gets me now is that I spent 6 years being told, by the person I trust most in the world, that I hadn't seen what I saw. And he was doing it to protect me. He'd say that. He'd say it was the right call. But I lay in that bunk a lot of nights, between 2015 and 2021, wondering what was wrong with my head. And there wasn't anything wrong with my head. That's what I tell you. If you take one thing out of this, it's not the road that gets you. It's how easy it is for somebody who loves you to decide what you're better off believing. I've sat with that ending longer than any of the others in this recording. And I don't believe she was only talking about her husband. The next man did the opposite of what Dale did. He took the thing seriously the first time it happened to him, and it cost him his living. He was an owner-operator running a night load out of Princeton, West Virginia, in the early 90s. And to explain what he did about it, he has to walk the whole thing backward. I sold the truck on a Tuesday in October of 1993 for $11,000 less than it was worth to the first man who came and looked at it. And I did not negotiate. That's where I have to start, because if I start at the other end, you'll spend the whole time waiting for something. And there isn't a something. I'd been an owner-operator 6 years. That truck was paid off in 14 more months. My wife did not speak to me for most of a week. and she had every right. I want to walk it backward from there, because that's how I've had to walk it my whole life. The Sunday before I sold it, I sat at my kitchen table and went through my logbook. You've got to understand the logbook. In 1993, there's no electronic anything. You keep a paper log, a grid, 15-minute increments, and you draw a line across it showing driving, on duty, sleeper, off duty. It's a federal document. You lie in it. Everybody lies in it, but you lie carefully, because DOT can pull it and match it against your fuel receipts and your bills of lading, and if the numbers don't line up, you're done. Which means a driver's log book is the most detailed record of a human life that has ever existed. Where you were, what hour, for years. I had 4 years of them in a box, and what I was looking for, that Sunday, was the Bluestone run. I ran a regular load out of a plant near Princeton, down through the mountains and out toward Wytheville. Once a week, sometimes twice, left the plant around 11 at night. About 2 hours of it on a 2-lane before you get anywhere. There's a section maybe 40 minutes in, where the road runs above a river, with the bank dropping off on the right and the mountain on the left. No houses, no pull-offs to speak of. Here's what had been happening, and I'd been not thinking about it for close to a year. I'd get to the end of that section and be 20 minutes down, that's all. 20 minutes, sometimes 15, once about 35. And I don't mean I ran slow. I mean I would come off that stretch and look at the clock, and the clock would be wrong, and I would not be able to account for it. The first time, I figured I'd sat at the plant longer than I thought. Second time, I figured I'd got behind a coal truck. Third and fourth time, I started writing my times down at the top of the grade and at the bottom, in pencil, in the margin of the log, which is a thing you're not supposed to do to a federal document. That Sunday at my kitchen table, I put all of it in a row, 14 runs where I'd written it down, 11 of them long. And here's the thing that made me sell a truck, every single one of the long ones. I had no memory of the stretch, not a fuzzy memory, not the ordinary highway hypnosis, where you go 10 miles thinking about your daughter's braces and come out of it and don't remember passing a town. Every driver alive has that, and I'd had it 10,000 times, and it does not frighten me. This was a hole. I'd remember the plant. I'd remember the gate. I'd remember getting to the top of the grade, and then I would remember being at the bottom with the clock wrong, and in between there was nothing at all. Not the road, not the radio, not a single thought, and the short runs. The 3 normal ones, I remembered fine. Now I'll go further back, because there was one where I did remember something, and it's the reason I was writing times down at all. That was in February of 1993, and it was the only time. I came out of it partway. That's the only way I've ever been able to say it. I was on the stretch above the river, and I sort of arrived in myself, the way you do when somebody says your name in a meeting, and I was doing about 40, and both my hands were on the wheel, and the radio was off. I never drove with the radio off, not once in 6 years, and my window was down. It was February. It was somewhere around 20 degrees down on that river, and my window was all the way down, and my left arm was so cold, I couldn't feel my own fingers on the wheel. I was on a 2-lane above a river at midnight in February, with the window down and the radio off, driving perfectly well, right between the lines, and I have no idea how long I'd been doing it. I got it stopped at a wide spot, and I got the window up, and I sat there with my heart going. And here's the part I didn't understand until years later. I never once looked in the sleeper. It didn't occur to me. Not for a second. Whatever that was, I never thought there was anybody in that truck with me. I looked at my own hands for a while. Then I drove to Withville and made my delivery. And I did not tell anybody for 12 years. Further back still. And this is the last of it. There was an old boy at the plant in Princeton named Cortez, who loaded me most weeks. 50-some. Been there forever. And in the fall of 1992, before any of this started, he said something to me while he was closing my doors. Just conversation, he said. "You run that road at night, don't you?" I said every week. And he said, "Huh, I done it 2 year. That's enough of that." And I laughed and said, "What's wrong with it?" And Cortez said, "Nothing's wrong with it." And he hit the door and gave it 2 slaps, which is what a man does when you're clear to pull. And I pulled. That's the entire conversation. I have thought about it for 34 years, and there is nothing in it. He didn't warn me. He didn't tell me one thing, but he'd quit driving it. And he told me so. And I heard a man making small talk about a road. So, that's backwards. And now you've got all of it. I drove a straight truck local for a beverage distributor for 19 years after that. Home every night, made less money, watched my kids grow up, which I would not have. I've never been back on that road, not once, and I've had a lot of chances, and I've made my wife drive around it twice on the way to her sister's, and she's never asked me why, which is its own kind of mercy. And here's the piece I can't put down at 72, and it isn't the lost time. I was a good driver, 6 years, no accidents, no violations, and whatever was doing the driving on that road while I wasn't there, it was good too. It kept it between the lines. It didn't hit anything. It got me to the bottom of that grade 11 times and set me back down in my own seat. And it never once put me in the river. I've spent 33 years being grateful to something and not knowing what and not being able to stop. I always put this one at the end. And I'll tell you why before he starts. Every other account in this recording is a person telling you about something they met on a road. This one is about a rule. An old driver handed it to a young one in 2008 on US 421 in the mountains along the Tennessee line, and he handed it over without a reason attached. The young man broke it 4 months later, and it took him another 9 years and a funeral to find out what the reason had been. My trainer's name was Wendell Pruitt, and he had one rule that wasn't in any manual, and I broke it 4 months after he stopped riding with me. I got my CDL in 2008, right when the bottom fell out of everything, and the only outfit hiring was a little company out of Bristol that ran the mountains. Tennessee, Virginia, Kentucky, up into West Virginia, backroads freight. The kind of routes big companies won't touch because you can't run a 53-footer on them. You ride with a trainer 6 weeks. Wendell was 61 and had been driving since Nixon, and he was the most boring man I have ever spent time with. And I mean that as high praise. He did not tell stories. He did not have opinions about politics. He taught me to back a trailer. He taught me to check my own brakes instead of trusting the last guy. And he corrected my logs in pencil like a school teacher. Week 4, we were running US 421 through the mountains on the Tennessee-Virginia line at night. That road is not a road. It's a series of arguments with a mountain. And out of nowhere, Wendell said, "You're going to see people on these roads." I said, "Okay." He said, At night, walking, standing, sitting on a guardrail. I said, okay, and he said, you don't stop. Not for any of them. Not one time. Ever. And I said, what if somebody's broke down? And Wendell said, you get to a phone and you call it in and you give them the mile marker. I said, what if they're hurt? And he said, you call it in. I want to be fair to him. There is a completely ordinary reason for that rule, and every driver knows it. In 2008, in that country, a truck stopped on a dark road with one man in it is a target. Guys got robbed. A woman at a ramp is sometimes bait, and there's a fellow in the trees. Companies tell you not to stop. Insurance tells you not to stop. It's in the handbook, more politely. So, I took it as that. And I said, yes, sir, and we ran the rest of the night. But at about 4 in the morning, coming down off Shady Valley, Wendell said one more thing. Unprompted, and it did not sound like insurance. He said, and if you do stop, don't get out. That's what I broke. November 2008. I'd been solo 4 months. I was 24, and I thought I was the best driver in Tennessee, which every 24-year-old with 4 months does. I was on 421 northbound, about 1 in the morning, running empty, heading to a pickup in Bristol, and there was an old man sitting on the guardrail. I want to give you exactly what I saw, because I got a long look, 70 plus, sitting, not standing, on the guardrail on the right, with his hands on his knees, wearing a jacket, bare head, and he was sitting the way an old man sits when his legs have quit. Hunched, elbows out, there's nothing up there. No houses for 2 miles either way. It's 40 degrees. And I thought, somebody's grandfather has wandered off. That's a real thing. That happens. People with dementia walk out of houses, and they end up on roads, and they die of exposure. And it's one of the most common ways a person disappears in that country. I stopped, I pulled past him, and got over as far as I could, and put the flashers on. And I sat there for a second with Wendell in my head, and then I told myself Wendell's rule was about robbery, and this was an old man in the cold. And I opened my door and got out. I walked back along the trailer 20-some feet, and I could see him the whole way in the flashers. Orange and off. At about 15 feet, I stopped walking. I've never been able to explain this part, and I've stopped apologizing for it. Nothing happened. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't stand up. I got to 15 feet, and my legs stopped, and my whole body went cold from the scalp down, and I have never felt anything like it before or since. Not in a fight. Not when my father died. Not ever. It was the hands. His hands were on his knees, and they weren't doing anything. An old man sitting in the cold at 1 in the morning does something with his hands. He rubs them. He puts them under his arms. He picks at his jacket. A body that's cold does not hold still. I was cold standing there for 40 seconds, and I was already shifting my weight. Those hands lay on those knees like they'd been set there, and he was looking at the road. Not at my truck, not at me, coming up on him in orange light, at the road. Across it, at the bank on the other side, I said, "N, sir?" And he turned his head. That's all he did. That's the whole event. An old man on a guardrail turned his head and looked at me, and I ran, 24 years old, 6'1", and I turned around and ran up the side of my own trailer and got in the cab and locked the door and pulled out with the flashers still going. And I did about 55 on a road posted for 35 for 4 miles. I called it in from the truck stop, gave the mile marker, said there was an elderly man on the guardrail who might be confused, might need help. They sent somebody. I know they did. Because I called back the next afternoon like a coward, and a woman told me a deputy had checked, and there was nobody there. Now here's the part that's actually the story, and it took me 9 more years to get it. Wendell died in 2017. I went to the funeral in Blountville, and afterward at the church there was food, and I ended up next to his widow, and I said what you say. I said he was a good teacher, and that I still checked my own brakes because of him, and she said, "He worried about you all." I said, "Ma'am?" And she said Wendell used to come in off a run and sit at the kitchen table with his coffee, and he'd say, "I hope that boy don't stop for anybody." And I said, and I don't know why I said it, at a funeral. To a widow, I said, "Did he ever stop?" And she looked at me for a while, and she said, "In 1979. I waited, and Mrs. Pruitt said, "He never would tell me what it was. He'd just say he got out of the truck." And then she said, "He wouldn't drive at night for near 2 years after. We about lost the house." And then she asked whether I wanted more of the ham. That's it. That is everything I know, and everything I'm ever going to know. Because the only man who could have told me the rest of it spent 38 years deciding not to, including 6 weeks sitting 18 inches from me in a truck. I drive days now. I have since 2012. I take less money for it. And my wife thinks it's about seeing the kids. And it is partly about seeing the kids. I've got a boy who's 19 and talking about getting his CDL, and I've been trying for a year to work out what to tell him because Wendell gave me the rule and didn't give me the reason. And I thought that was him being a hard old man. And I broke it inside of 4 months. And if I give my son the reason, if I sit him down and tell him about an old man's hands on his knees on 4/21 in November, then he's going to get in a truck at night for the next 40 years with that in his head. And he'll see it in every guardrail from here to Ohio. And I will have put it there. So I understand Wendell now. I understand exactly what he was doing. I just don't know if it worked, and I never will, because he's dead, and I stopped anyway. So that's the 6. I'll tell you what struck me, going back through the tapes. Every one of these people is a professional. That's not a small thing. These are men and women who spent decades doing something most people would not last a week at. 11 hours in a box, alone, at night, in weather, responsible for 80,000 pounds of steel on a mountain grade. They are, as a group, the least dramatic people I have ever interviewed. They gave me mile markers. They gave me the weather. 3 of them corrected my geography. Not one of them told me they'd seen a ghost. Every single one of them handed me the ordinary explanation before I'd finished asking. Fog does that to a man's eyes. Somebody was messing with me on the radio. She was in shock. It was 4 people in a broke-down car. It was highway hypnosis. It was an old man with dementia, and I should have helped him. Most of them are probably right, and every one of them changed something afterward, and none of them changed it back. He drove an extra hour around a mountain for 22 years, rather than run that grade in fog. He turned the radio off and kept a CB in his basement he'll never use. He slowed down at the same exit ramp every night for 2 years, looking. She spent 6 years wondering what was wrong with her head. He sold a truck he was 14 months from owning, and a man in Tennessee has a 19-year-old son who wants a CDL and cannot decide whether telling him the truth would be a kindness or a curse. That's the whole shape of it, and it's why I keep collecting these. Not one of them can prove a thing happened to them out there. Every one of them knows it. Most of them would tell you flat out that they doubt it. And all 6 are still driving around it. 46 years, 33 years, every road, every night, for the rest of their lives. Whatever was out there on those roads never touched a single one of them. It didn't have to. Sleep well.